An elderly nun lived in a convent next door to a construction site. Every day, she was horrified by the workers' rough language and constant shouting. Finally, she decided it was time to set a good example. The next afternoon, she packed herself a simple lunch, walked over to the construction site, and sat down with the crew during their break. The men suddenly became very quiet. Smiling warmly, the nun looked around and asked, "Tell me, gentlemen, do any of you know Jesus Christ?" The workers exchanged puzzled looks. After a moment, one of them cupped his hands and shouted up to the men working high on the steel beams. "Hey! Does anybody up there know Jesus Christ?" A voice called back. "Why?" The worker grinned and yelled. "Because his mother's here. And she's brought his lunch." A husband and wife, both in their 90s, had begun having little memory problems. During a checkup, their doctor told them, "Physically, you're both doing very well. But it might help to start writing things down so you don't forget them." That evening, they were relaxing in front of the television when the old man stood up. "I'm heading into the kitchen," he said. "Would you like anything?" His wife smiled. "I'd love a bowl of ice cream." "Coming right up," he said. "Shouldn't you write that down?" she asked. "No," he replied confidently. "I can remember a bowl of ice cream. Well, I'd like some strawberries on top, too." "I'll remember. And a little whipped cream." She looked at him and said, "You'd better write it down." He waved her off. "For heaven's sake, I don't need to write it down. I can remember it. Ice cream, strawberries, whipped cream. I've got it." About 20 minutes later, he shuffled back into the living room carrying a plate of bacon and eggs. He proudly set it down in front of her. She stared at it for a few seconds, shook her head, and said, "I knew it. You forgot the toast." Rob and Dave were walking down the street when Rob suddenly stopped. "Hey, look at that," he whispered. "That woman on the balcony is blowing kisses at me." Dave barely glanced up. "Just ignore her." A moment later, the woman smiled and motioned for one of them to come upstairs. Rob's eyes lit up. "Did you see that? She's inviting me up." Dave grabbed his arm. "Don't do it." "Why not?" Rob asked. "She's obviously interested. I'm telling you, don't go." But Rob wasn't listening. He hurried into the building, and the woman met him at the apartment door. A few minutes later, just as things were getting interesting. "Honk! Honk!" The woman peeked through the curtains. "Oh no! That's my husband!" Rob turned pale. "What do we do?" She pointed to a huge basket overflowing with wrinkled laundry. "Quick! Start ironing. If he asks, you're the new housekeeper." The husband came inside and never left the house for the rest of the day. Poor Rob spent hour after hour ironing shirts, pants, dresses, towels, anything that wasn't nailed down. The next day, exhausted, he went to Dave's house. "You were right," he groaned. "Her husband came home, and I spent the entire day pretending to be the housekeeper. I ironed clothes for 8 straight hours." Dave just shook his head. "I warned you not to go." Rob frowned. "But how did you know that would happen?" Dave smiled. "Because I washed and folded all those clothes the day before." A man went to his doctor looking exhausted. "Doctor," he said, "I'm at my wit's end. My wife loses her temper over the smallest things, and every argument turns into a shouting match. What can I do?" The doctor smiled. "I have a very simple remedy. The next time your wife starts getting angry, fill your mouth with water. Don't swallow it. Just keep swishing it around until she either calms down or leaves the room." The man looked skeptical, but he agreed to give it a try. 2 weeks later, he returned to the doctor's office looking happier than he'd been in years. "Doctor," he said, "that advice worked like magic. Every time my wife started yelling, I filled my mouth with water and kept swishing. Within a few minutes, everything settled down. But I have to ask, how does the water work?" The doctor smiled and said, "It isn't the water. It's keeping your mouth shut." Paddy and Mick were sitting in the pub one evening when Mick noticed Paddy staring miserably into his pint of Guinness. "What's wrong with you?" Mick asked. "You look like the world just ended." Paddy let out a long sigh. "I need your advice, Mick." "About what?" Paddy leaned in and whispered. "I think my wife is having an affair." Mick nearly spilled his drink. "Good grief! What makes you think that?" Paddy took another sip. "All the usual signs. She's been going out with her friends more often, coming home late, and whenever the phone rings, the caller hangs up as soon as I answer." He shook his head. "I've tried staying awake to catch her, but I always end up falling asleep." "So what happened?" Mick asked. "Well, last night I finally stayed awake. I hid behind my fishing boat in the shed. Just after midnight, a car pulled into the driveway. My wife got out looking flustered. Her hair was a mess, her lipstick was smudged, and she was trying to button up her blouse." Mick leaned forward. "That's terrible." Paddy nodded. "It is. That's why I need your help." "Anything, Paddy. Just ask." Paddy finished his Guinness and said, "While I was hiding behind the boat, I noticed a crack in the motor mounting plate. You know about outboard motors. Do you think I can weld it, or should I replace the whole thing?" An elderly woman hired an artist to paint her portrait. Before he picked up his brush, she gave him a very unusual request. "I want you to paint me wearing a diamond necklace, diamond earrings, emerald bracelets, a ruby brooch, and a solid gold Rolex." The artist looked at her in confusion. "But you're not wearing any of those things." The old lady smiled. "I know. So why do you want me painted with them?" She leaned back in her chair and said, "Because if I die before my husband, I'm sure he'll get married again." The artist nodded. "And?" She grinned. "I want his new wife to spend the rest of her life tearing the house apart looking for the jewelry." One afternoon, a wealthy businessman took a rare break from his busy schedule and went for a walk along the beach. As he strolled by the shore, he noticed a fisherman lying beside his small boat, smoking a pipe and watching the waves. Curious, he walked over and asked, "Why aren't you out fishing?" The fisherman smiled. "I've already caught enough fish for today." The businessman frowned. "Why don't you stay out longer and catch more?" The fisherman shrugged. "What for?" "To make more money," the businessman said. "With the extra money, you could buy a bigger boat. And then? Then you could catch even more fish, hire workers, buy more boats, and build a successful fishing business. And then?" The businessman was getting excited. "Eventually, you'd own an entire fleet. You could become rich." The fisherman nodded. "And then?" The businessman grinned. "Then you could retire, spend your days lying on the beach, smoking your pipe, and enjoying life." The fisherman smiled, looked out at the ocean, and quietly replied, "What do you think I'm doing right now?" A lawyer and his wife had 12 children. When the lease on their house expired, they needed to find a new place to live. Unfortunately, every time a landlord heard they had 12 children, the answer was the same. "Sorry, we don't think the house will survive." The lawyer couldn't lie about having children. After all, he was a lawyer. So he came up with a clever plan. He asked his wife to take 11 of the children for a walk through the local cemetery while he took the youngest child to look at houses with a real estate agent. Eventually, they found a house they both liked. As they were filling out the paperwork, the agent smiled and asked, "So, how many children do you have?" 12, the lawyer replied. The agent looked around. "I only see one. Where are the others?" The lawyer lowered his head, sighed sadly, and said, "They're at the cemetery, with their mother." The agent's face fell. "I'm so sorry." The lawyer simply nodded. A few minutes later, the lease was signed. And every word he said had been the truth. A very pregnant woman boarded a crowded bus, and noticed a young man smiling at her. Feeling uncomfortable, she got up and moved to another seat. The young man smiled even wider. Annoyed, she moved again. This time, he started grinning from ear to ear. She changed seats a third time. Now he was struggling to keep from laughing. Finally, she moved to yet another seat. The young man burst into uncontrollable laughter. Embarrassed and furious, the woman reported him to the bus driver, and the police were called. Soon they found themselves standing before a judge. The judge turned to the young man and said, "Young man, what could possibly be so funny about this poor woman's situation?" The man stood up and respectfully replied, "Your Honor, I wasn't laughing at the lady. When she first sat down, she was under an advertisement that said, 'The Doublemint twins are coming.' So I smiled. Then she moved under another sign that read, 'Logan's liniment reduces swelling.' So I grinned. Next, she sat beneath a deodorant advertisement that said, 'William's big stick did the trick.' At that point, I was trying very hard not to laugh. But then she moved one last time and sat directly under a sign that read, 'Goodyear rubber could have prevented this accident.' I couldn't hold it in anymore. The judge tried to keep a straight face, then banged his gavel and said, 'Case dismissed.'" A woman in her 40s began noticing that age was slowly catching up with her. Hoping to turn back the clock, she visited a famous plastic surgeon. After examining her, the surgeon said, "I have something much better than a traditional facelift. It's called the key." He explained that a tiny key would be implanted at the back of her head. "Every 6 months, all you have to do is give it a small turn, and it will tighten the skin on your face. No surgery, no scars." The woman loved the idea and had the procedure done. For the next 15 years, it worked perfectly. Twice a year she'd give the key a little turn, and every time she looked years younger. Eventually, she returned to the surgeon. "Doctor," she said, "the key has been wonderful, but I've developed 2 problems. First, I've got these terrible bags under my eyes, and no matter how much I tighten the key, they won't go away." The surgeon looked at her carefully and smiled. "Those aren't bags. They're your breasts." The woman stared at him in shock. "Oh." She paused for a moment, then sighed. "I suppose there's no point asking about the beard, then." My wife and I were visiting the livestock pavilion at the county fair when we stopped to admire the breeding bulls. The first pen had a sign that read, "This bull mated 50 times last year." My wife smiled, nudged me, and said, 50 times in 1 year. Not bad." We walked over to the next pen. The sign read, "This bull mated 150 times last year." She gave me another elbow. "Now that's impressive. That's almost 3 times a week. You could learn a thing or two from him." Trying to ignore the comment, I kept walking. Then we reached the final pen. The sign proudly announced, "This bull mated 365 times last year." My wife stopped in her tracks. 365 times. She looked at me with a grin. "That's once every single day. You could really learn something from this bull." I smiled sweetly and replied, "Honey, why don't you go ask him if it was with the same cow every time?" The last thing I remember was waking up in the hospital. The doctors say I'm expected to make a full recovery, although I'll probably have a slight limp for the rest of my life. A man was riding his Harley along the California coast when the sky suddenly darkened. A booming voice echoed from the heavens. "My son, because you have tried to be faithful to me throughout your life, I will grant you one wish." The biker pulled over, looked up, and said, "Lord, I've always dreamed of riding my Harley to Hawaii. Could you build a bridge from California all the way there so I can ride across whenever I want?" There was a moment of silence before God replied, "My son, that's an enormous request. Think about what it would take: thousands of miles of bridge, millions of tons of steel and concrete, and supports reaching all the way to the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. I could do it, but it's an incredible amount of work for one man's vacation." Perhaps you'd like to wish for something that would benefit humanity instead. The biker thought for a long time. Finally, he nodded. All right, Lord. I'd like to truly understand women. I want to know what they're thinking, why they cry, what they really mean when they say, I'm fine, why they get upset when I'm only trying to help, and what it takes to make a woman genuinely happy. There was a very long silence. Then God cleared his throat and asked, So, would you like that bridge to be 2 lanes? Or 4? Sarah's mother-in-law decided to stop by the newlyweds' house without warning. She knocked once, let herself in, and froze. There was Sarah, lying on the couch without any clothes on. What on earth are you doing? Her mother-in-law gasped. I'm waiting for Harry to come home from work, Sarah replied with a smile. But, you're not wearing anything. Sarah grinned. This is my love dress. My love dress? That's right. Harry loves it when I wear this. It makes him happy, and it makes me happy. The mother-in-law couldn't stop thinking about it. On the way home she thought, maybe I've been doing this marriage thing all wrong. So she went home, took a long shower, put on her favorite perfume, got rid of every stitch of clothing, and stretched out on the couch, waiting for her husband to arrive. A little while later he walked through the front door. He stared at her for a few seconds. What on earth are you doing, Sarah? She smiled sweetly. This is my love dress. He looked her up and down, nodded thoughtfully, and said, It needs ironing. Then he added, What's for dinner? In a small southern town, the prosecutor called his very first witness to the stand. She was a sweet-looking elderly woman named Mrs. Jones. The prosecutor smiled confidently and asked, Mrs. Jones, do you know me? She smiled back. Why, yes, I do. I've known you since you were a little boy. And frankly, you've been one of life's biggest disappointments. The courtroom went silent. You lie, you cheat on your wife, you manipulate people, and you gossip about others behind their backs. You think you're an important man, but you're nothing more than an overgrown bully with an oversized ego. Yes. I know you. The prosecutor turned bright red. Trying to recover, he pointed across the courtroom. Mrs. Jones, do you know the defense attorney? Oh yes, she said with a nod. I've known Mr. Bradley since he was a child. He's lazy, arrogant, drinks far too much, and has one of the worst law practices in the state. He can't keep a healthy relationship, and he cheated on his wife with 3 different women. She paused. One of them happened to be your wife. The defense attorney looked like he was about to pass out. The entire courtroom sat in stunned silence. The judge slowly leaned forward, looked at both lawyers, and said in a low voice, If either one of you fools asks her whether she knows me, I'll hold you both in contempt. A married man was visiting his girlfriend when she asked him to shave off his beard. Oh, Brian, she said. Please shave it off. I want to see all of your handsome face. I can't, Brian replied. My wife loves this beard. She'd kill me if I shaved it off. Please, she pleaded in a teasing voice. Brian finally gives in and shaves off the beard. Later that night, Brian crawls into bed while his wife is sleeping. She wakes up and feels his face in the dark. Then she says, Oh, Kevin, you shouldn't be here now. Brian will be home shortly. A husband and wife decided they needed a secret code word for when they wanted a little romantic time together, something their young daughter wouldn't understand. After thinking it over, they agreed on the code word. Typewriter. One evening, the husband said to his 5-year-old daughter, Sweetheart, would you go tell Mommy that Daddy wants to use the typewriter? The little girl skipped off and delivered the message. A moment later she returned and said, Mommy says you can't use the typewriter right now, because there's a red ribbon in it. A few days later, the wife smiled at her daughter and said, Go tell Daddy the typewriter is ready whenever he wants to use it. The little girl ran off to deliver the message. A minute later she came back giggling. Daddy said not to worry. He already wrote the letter by hand. An 80-year-old man went to the doctor for his annual checkup. After a thorough examination, the doctor smiled. For a man your age, you're in remarkable shape. The old fellow grinned. I owe it all to clean living. I've lived a good, honest, spiritual life. The doctor chuckled. And what makes you so certain of that? The old man leaned in and said, Every night when I get up to use the bathroom, the good Lord turns the light on for me. The doctor raised an eyebrow. He does? Oh, absolutely. As soon as I open the door, the light comes on. Later that day, the man's wife arrived for her own appointment. The doctor hesitated, then said, I don't want to worry you, but your husband believes God turns the bathroom light on for him every night. She rolled her eyes, sighed, and said, That old fool. He's been peeing in the refrigerator again. A man was wandering through the Sahara Desert, hopelessly lost. His lips were cracked, his throat was bone dry, and he was convinced he wouldn't last much longer. Then, shimmering in the distance, he spotted someone. Summoning the last of his strength, he stumbled toward the figure. It was an old man sitting behind a card table, covered with neckties. The exhausted traveler gasped. Please! I'm dying of thirst. Do you have any water? The old man smiled. Sorry, son. No water. But how about a nice necktie? I've got silk, striped, polka dots, all at great prices. The traveler stared at him in disbelief. I don't need a tie. I need water. The old man shrugged. Suit yourself. But I'll help you anyway. About 5 miles over that sand dune, my brother owns a restaurant. They'll have all the food and water you could ever want. The man thanked him and staggered off toward the dune. Several hours later, he crawled back looking even worse than before. The old man jumped up. What happened? Couldn't you find the restaurant? The traveler croaked. Oh, I found it. But they wouldn't let me in without a tie. A woman was out enjoying a round of golf with her girlfriends when she suddenly looked at her watch. Oh no! She gasped. I've got to get home. My husband expects dinner on the table, and he'll be furious if it's late. She rushed home, threw open the refrigerator, and found almost nothing. Just one wilted lettuce leaf, one lonely egg, and a can of cat food. There wasn't time to go shopping. So she opened the can, mixed in the egg, placed the lettuce leaf on top to make it look fancy, and served it for dinner. She braced herself for the worst. Her husband took a bite. Then another. And another. Finally, he smiled. Honey, this is the best meal you've made in our 40 years of marriage. You've got to make this again. From that day on, every golf day, she served him the very same dinner. When she told her golfing friends, they were horrified. Are you crazy? That stuff will kill him. About 2 months later, her husband passed away. At the next golf game, one of the women quietly asked, So, was it the cat food? The widow shook her head. No. It wasn't the food. He fell off the windowsill while licking his butt. The madam of an upscale New York City brothel answered the front door and found a well-dressed, distinguished-looking man in his late 40s standing outside. Good evening, sir, she said with a smile. How may I help you? I'd like to see Rosie, he replied. The madam hesitated. Rosie is our most exclusive lady, and by far our most expensive. Perhaps one of our other ladies would suit you? The man shook his head. No. I want Rosie. Rosie was called downstairs. She looked the gentleman over and said, My fee is $10,000. Without blinking, the man reached into his pocket, counted out the money, and handed it to her. They went upstairs. An hour later, he quietly left. The following evening, the same man returned. The madam couldn't believe her eyes. Again, he insisted on seeing Rosie. Again, he paid $10,000 without hesitation. An hour later, he left. By the third night, the entire house was talking. No client had ever paid Rosie's fee 3 nights in a row. Once again, the man handed over $10,000, spent an hour with Rosie, and prepared to leave. Unable to contain her curiosity any longer, Rosie asked, "I've been doing this for years, and no one has ever visited me 3 nights in a row. Where are you from?" He smiled. "Brooklyn." Her eyes widened. "Brooklyn? That's where my family lives." "I know," he replied. "Your sister recently passed away. I'm the lawyer handling her estate. She asked me to personally deliver your $30,000 inheritance." Little Johnny's class was taking turns telling stories with a moral. Little Susie stood up first. "I collected all the eggs from our hen house, but on the way home I dropped the basket and every single egg broke. The moral is, don't put all your eggs in one basket." "Excellent," said the teacher. Next was little Frankie. "My mom found an old, dusty book in the basement and told me to read it. I didn't want to because it looked boring. But it turned out to be The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, and I loved it. The moral is, don't judge a book by its cover." "Very good," the teacher said. Then little Johnny raised his hand. "Go ahead, Johnny." Johnny stood up proudly. "My Uncle Ted was a fighter pilot during the war. One day, while attacking enemy positions, his plane was hit by anti-aircraft fire. Both engines burst into flames." The teacher looked uneasy. Johnny continued. "Uncle Ted knew the plane wasn't going to make it. So he pulled the ejection handle. As he blasted out of the cockpit, he grabbed the bottle of whiskey he kept beside his seat." The class was completely silent. "While he floated down under his parachute, he drank the entire bottle. Unfortunately, he landed right in the middle of a group of enemy soldiers. He pulled out his pistol and shot 6 of them before he ran out of bullets. Then he pulled out his combat knife and took care of 3 more. And when the knife broke, he strangled the last one with his parachute cords." The teacher stood there speechless. Finally she cleared her throat and asked, "Johnny, what could possibly be the moral of that story?" Johnny shrugged and said, "Don't mess with Uncle Ted when he's been drinking." An employee called his boss early one morning. "Boss," he groaned, "I'm too sick to come in today. I've got a pounding headache, my stomach's a mess, my legs ache." "I just can't make it," the boss replied. "You know what I do when I feel like that?" "No, sir. I go home, make passionate love for my wife, and afterward I feel like a brand new man. You should give it a try." A couple of hours later, the employee called back. "Boss, you were absolutely right. I feel fantastic now. I'll be at work shortly." There was a brief pause. "Oh, and by the way, you've got a really beautiful house." A young doctor had recently moved to a small town to replace a retiring physician. The older doctor suggested the young man accompany him on his rounds so the community could get to know their new doctor. At the first house, a woman complains, "I've been feeling a bit sick to my stomach." The older doctor says, "You've probably been overdoing the fresh fruit. Why don't you cut back and see if that helps?" As they leave, the younger doctor asks, "You didn't even examine her. How did you come to that diagnosis so quickly?" The older doctor smiles and explains, "I didn't need to examine her. Did you notice I dropped my stethoscope on the floor? When I bent down to pick it up, I saw a half-dozen banana peels in the waste bin. I figured that was the cause of her upset stomach." The younger doctor is impressed and says, "That's clever. I'll try something similar at the next house." At the next stop, a younger woman complains, "I've been feeling terribly run down lately." "You're probably doing too much for the church," the younger doctor says. "Maybe you should cut back on your duties and see if that helps." As they leave, the older doctor asks, "I know that woman well. Your diagnosis seems spot on, but how did you come to it?" The younger doctor replies, "I did what you did at the last house. I dropped my stethoscope, and when I bent down to pick it up, I noticed the vicar under the bed." An elderly couple decides to celebrate their 50th anniversary at the fancy restaurant where they used to go on dates when they were younger. After a few drinks, the husband stands up, looks around the restaurant, and asks his wife with a sly grin, "Do you think we should go behind this place and relive our first time here, maybe against the fences?" With a knowing smile and a nod, his wife agrees. The two of them sneak out the back and into the alley behind the restaurant. Not long after, a bike patrol cop cruises by and hears what sounds like an intense love-making session. The passionate noises echo into the street, and he flashes his headlights onto the couple just as they've finished. Looking confused, the cop asks, "What are you two doing? I've never seen a couple go at it with such passion in all my years on the job." The old man, adjusting his pants and buckling his belt, looks up at the officer and replies, "Well, 50 years ago, this place didn't have electrified fences."